I really would like to try and save this pair of Brown and Sharpe calipers because these are Swiss made. These are probably Tesa made these. If I go slow, it's very distinctive. Every so many revolutions it's jumping. So I think the first step would be to get this off. I'm thinking that's why somebody took this bar off. They might have thought they could just slide this off. But the problem is the rack, teeth in the rack end in here. So in order to take this all the way off, you've got to slide the rack out. And to get the rack out, there's actually screws on the back. Wow, I tell you what, these screws that hold this rack in are in there really tight. There we go. Okay. There we go. Rack's out. Now this should come out all the way. Cool. Well, it turns out that these particular model of Brown and Sharpe calipers are identical to the Etalon, Swiss made, and the Tesa calipers of the same vintage, and they all share something in common, which is that this bezel right here is actually part of this whole assembly, so this can't be removed. On some dial calipers you actually remove the dial, and there's screws behind there to take this apart, but this is not made that way. So in order to actually remove this, what you need to do is you actually need to pry this off, and they basically say that you have to pry it off real carefully, I guess. So let's see if we can't see what kind of trouble we can get into here. I like them apples. Okay, so I'm going to have to remove this plastic crystal I see in order to reinstall the needle. But now that I have this apart, I guess I can try and see what's going on with these gears. Alright, so I had to actually put this back on to try and get an idea how this works, and by taking this and putting it on, I can now see that the gear that I think is going to be the problem gear is down underneath here. So it looks like the next step is to take these 3 screws out and pull this assembly up and out. Ta-da! Alright, so good news is I found a little piece of swarf that was in the mechanism. It wasn't on the teeth at the time when I found it, but I figure it might have been just moving around in there. That's the only thing I could find wrong. So I'm hoping that's what the problem was. I cleaned the rack with an old soft bristle toothbrush. So now I need to get this little jib assembly, this little metal leaf right here, and this little wiper right here. I need to get these installed. They kind of fell out, and gotta make sure they go back in correctly. So luckily, since I didn't know how these went in exactly, from close-up visual inspection reveals the telltale little indentation marks on this wiper. Also, one side of the wiper clearly looks like it's been rubbing, so that's the side that's going to be moving, that's going to be in contact with the top of the body of the caliper. And then the leaf has a hole in it that one of these 2 screws that I removed goes through to keep this in position. And it also has little telltale tiny indentations on it that indicate to me exactly where or what side was facing the screws. So I'm going to get this all in. So now that I've got the thing in position correctly and lined up, closer examination of the 2 screws that I removed that hold this jib or this little wiper thing in actually reveals that they are not identical one of them has a little tip that extends down through those holes to keep that in position, so that when this is moving up and down, that can't just come sliding out the end. So the one with the little extension tip on it has to go through this side right here and pass through the two little holes in the actual wiper material and the little leaf spring itself, and that's what keeps it in position. So one of the steps that I did that I didn't do on camera was I inserted a plastic dowel through this hole on the back side here and popped off the plastic crystal. And the reason why I did that is because I'm going to have to remove that to put the dial back on. Nope. Still something sick here. I can't quite see exactly what's going on, but the gears don't look like they're staying in the right position. Well, from what I read online, essentially when you get to this point, if you find anything wrong with the gears, that you're just supposed to replace this whole assembly. Oh, mystery solved. I don't know how I missed it, but there's actually a this probably isn't even going to come out on video, but there is a tooth missing on the pinion right here. It's much more convenient to just replace, if any of the gears are damaged on here, to replace this whole movement. And the part number apparently is 99-579-11. That's the Brown and Sharpe part number. And that's all fine and dandy, but to make matters worse, a quick search of the internet shows that apparently I can't find this for sale anywhere. So I don't know, I could probably try and call Brown and Sharpe directly, maybe ask them. But I have a feeling that they're going to want more for this part than what these calipers are going to be worth when I finish. It's been several days since I last worked on this. So what I ended up discovering was that that gear was bad. And then I read online somewhere that if the gear is bad, or any of these gears are damaged, that you're supposed to replace this whole assembly. And there is a Brown and Sharpe part number for this assembly, but I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I probably could have called Brown and Sharpe headquarters down in Providence, Rhode Island, aka Tesa, and maybe gotten some information out of them. I don't know. But I reached out to MR Tool Company in Lancaster, Crystal Lake, Illinois. Mark Ritzkowski is the proprietor of that establishment, and he's gotten quite a reputation for himself as being a good guy to use for repairing tools, specifically precision indicators and micrometers, calipers, whatnot, machinist tools. One of the things that Mark is known for, apparently, is he's willing to try and fix just about anything, I think. There are certain manufacturers that you just can't get parts for any longer. And some of the larger, I think, shops actually will just tell you flat out you can't get parts for it anymore, don't bother sending it in. Whereas I think Mark's got a reputation of being a guy that if he can find find a part, a good used part, make a good usable device, and save it from being just garbage, he will. He explained to me that he believed he had a few of these mechanisms laying around, but each mechanism had something wrong with it. So he asked me to tell him specifically which gear it was that was at fault in mine. So I ended up sending him a photograph where I kind of drew a little arrow pointing right to the gear. And he said he would send me a used mechanism that would have a problem with it, but it would have that gear would be okay. So essentially
The idea is make one good mechanism out of a couple of bad ones. I think I already explained early on, this is way above my pay grade. Something that Mark could probably handle quite easily. But again, this is going to be just for resale, and take what little profit was left in this thing out of it by paying for the professional repair. So we're just going to go with this kind of attempt here. So all right, so Mark has included a couple of his cards. So we include a free little mini commercial for Mark. Now he's reached, probably at least 3 or 4 people. I do have some things I do want to send him eventually that are definitely not something that I want to mess up by trying myself. This, I'm willing to risk it. All right, so let's see what we got here. Actually, looks like he sent me even more than I needed. It looks like he may have sent me a mechanism and a gear. I'll probably end up sending this stuff right back to him. Oh, for anybody who was wondering, Mark was kind enough to send me this first class mail for a total of $10. So that was very nice of him, because he probably realized I was trying to do a very cost-effective repair here, and by sending it to me for $10, might be able to actually pull this off, and cost him $3.78 postage for this this thing. So the reality is he only made $6 and change on this, and actually I think he let me pay him by PayPal, so PayPal probably took their bite too. But anyway, so Mark, if for some strange reason you're watching this video, thank you very much for helping me out. Now it's all on me, really, right? This doesn't work. I've got no one to blame but myself. All right, so this is interesting. The gear that's missing teeth on my original one is actually this little tiny pinion that's on the top of this gear assembly. So it's a little hard to see, but right there where I'm pointing with the jeweler's screwdriver, there's one tooth missing on this little pinion gear. Right there. You see, spinning around, you can see there's the teeth, and then you can just see where it's missing one tooth there. All right, so this is the side I need to take care of. This side seems like there's nothing wrong with it, but it looks almost to me like Mark sent me more than I need. I guess he wanted to make sure I was able to have everything I needed in one shot. Here's the assembly he sent me. First off, I don't see anything wrong with this assembly. This, at first glance, I don't see any missing teeth on this thing. Yeah, I don't know if the teeth are damaged on that one side a little bit, maybe. Maybe right on the right side right there. Might be something funky going on. Right in there. I don't know. He sent me this gear, which looks like the gear I need to replace is right there on the top. And that looks okay. Right? And the bottom gear looks okay. And there's no gears in between. There's just like a spring assembly. So I think I can just put this in and be done. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, if I move the camera out of the way so I can use my magnifier, I can do this a lot easier. All right, so now I want to put this mechanism back in. Now, if I just put this mechanism back in, it'll work, but what will happen more than likely is that every time I return the caliper to fully closed and 0, the needle will not always come to 0. So my understanding is the reasoning behind that is if this spring that's inside here that we can't see, I'm not talking about this clock spring over here, I'm talking about behind this white disc, sandwiched between this white disc and this green gear, there is a tiny spring in there. And what you have to do is you have to preload that mechanism. And the idea is you preload it, and you can see there's a hole in this disc right there. And there's a hole in the gear on the top. And if we do this right, what actually will end up happening is we'll be able to stick something, a tiny pin, through this hole, and it'll go through the hole in the disc and hold that in the correct position where the spring will actually be wound. Then we install it, make sure it's meshing with the rack correctly, and once it's meshing with the rack correctly, we pull the pin. If we have it too loose and we pull the pin, then this will just undo itself and we'll have to start all over again. So this is going to be a tricky one. So the idea is we get that disc, keep that disc from moving, and then rotate this gear clockwise until that hole lines up. Well, if you're wondering what I'm going to use to put in that hole to lock the gear, I was going to use a very, very fine drill bit, and then I realized I could just cut a strand of copper wire. So this is one single strand out of some, about 14 gauge copper wire, stranded copper wire. Now I gotta preload this and get this screw in, this makeshift pin in. This ought to be fun. I need to make sure that that hole is positioned here so that when I line this gear up, bring this gear around, I'll be able to stick that pin in right through there. Alright, so I messed around with this for quite a while, and I just couldn't figure out why, no matter what I tried, when I would install this mechanism back in to the rack, what would happen is when I would move back and forth like this, it kept jamming and acting very strange, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what it was. And then I looked, and I happened to notice, looking at the springs on this side right here, the way this is all set up, this configuration, this is all messed up. This is not supposed to be like this. And not knowing what I'm looking at, because I don't have any experience with this, I wouldn't have known, except that when I compared it to the one that Mark had sent me, I could see that, oh, okay, that's supposed to be put together a very specific way. This spring appears to have been sprung out of position, and this is all messed up. And I was like, well, gee, I don't quite understand why that would make a difference, but sure enough, I put Mark's mechanism in that he sent me, and it seems to work perfectly fine now. So then I was wondering, well, why did Mark send me what seems to be a perfectly good mechanism and a good gear that I put into here? And then I looked at it more closely and realized, oh, I see what's wrong with this one. This mechanism that he sent me, there's no pin to put the needle on. So if you look at the original one, there's actually a little pin sticking up. That's going to show. You can just see that little tiny pin there sticking up. That little tiny pin is broken off by the looks of it on this one. So that's not going to work. So I guess what I could do is I could either take this apart, take this gear mechanism out of this one, put it into my original one, or take that center gear right there that's got this pin on it out of this one and put it into this one. I guess at this point it's, you know, half a dozen or one or the other. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I need to take this gear back out. I need to make this gear look like alright, so it looks like what I've got to do is this has to get rotated around, this pin right here. This has to rotate around and sit up against this black piece.
Come on. Like that, okay? Then
this spring has to be pulled back and get behind this so that it's pushing that up against that. I'll show you the one that's together correctly, or I believe is together correctly. See what's going on there? You can see the spring there. Alright, I'm not going to lie to you. I gave up on trying to get this spring right. Actually, that's the one that is correct, but the teeth are broken on that one. That's my original one. This is the one that I was trying to save. But I just could not get that little end of that spring back onto the position that it needed to be on. But after trying several times and getting frustrated, I just decided to cannibalize the other mechanism and get that gear. Then I did the little trick we talked about where I preloaded this and put my little piece of wire in there. Got that all in. Now I've got it together, and it actually seems like it's working pretty well. I don't know if I want to tweak the position of this rack or not. The catch-22 here is that if your rack is too far in and the mechanism's too far in and meshing too hard with the rack, it won't be smooth and it could bind. And if you back it out too far, the rack pinion could actually come far enough disengaged from the rack that the preload that you put on this thing will spin out, and basically you'll be back to where you were when you started. I'm hoping that didn't happen. I think it's okay. If that did happen, I'll know, because when I go to put this together, it will have a nasty habit of not returning to zero. Well, it took me like 2 tries. I tried tweaking the rack a little bit, the position of the frame a little bit here, and to change that relationship between the pinion and the rack. And the first time I tried doing it, I accidentally pulled out too far, and the pinion, the tension on this wheel that I had gone through all the trouble of presetting was lost. So I had to take it off and reset that, put the piece of wire back in there, and do it again. Now I have it. It feels much better. It still has this horrible sound. I actually don't know where, if any place where this should be lubricated. But it does seem to be no longer jamming. It seems to be smooth throughout its travel. So that's an improvement. Quick Google online. Everything I seem to see tends to indicate that no, there should be no lubricant whatsoever used inside this. This still feels a little crunchy. Yeah, I would say that these are still not right, but maybe they're closer. Alright, I just cleaned up the gunk that was hiding around the edges here. So that looks better. This one corner does not want to go in. I'll tell you another thing. Even if that did go down right there, that pin the dial is way too far that way. The pin that the needle indicator pointer is going to be on is out of position. But I thought I had this rack positioned correctly already. I don't know. Apparently I was just babying it too much. Oh, that was brutal. That sound. The next miraculous feat is going to be installing the needle. The trick is clocking this thing so that it's pretty much the zeros at the top. Don't have to be exactly on because, of course, I can move the dial. Oh my God. That's a train wreck. What the hell's going on with this thing? I don't think that's a problem with the needle. I think that's actually something still very wrong with my mechanism. Look at that, it returned to zero. That is weird. That's why I don't do this for a living. It almost returned to zero that time. It's kind of weird how it's acting. There's a special little tiny puller for pulling these off. I don't have one. All right, I pushed the bezel back on just to keep dirt from getting in there. You can see it just every once in a while it returns to the same spot. It's not consistent. I think it might have something to do. I might have not properly preloaded that little disc that's in there underneath that green spring. Gear. But it also, sounds like a train wreck too. So I'm just gonna quit here and call this a fail. These just are not. These were nice. But they're just really not worth, I think, sending out and getting repaired. $599, 579-4s.